Welcome back to Fear Rest. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 true disturbing stories from people who went off trail in the Appalachian wilderness. These are tales of hikers, explorers, and wanderers who ventured into the mountains and hollows and found something they were never meant to see. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The stretch of the Appalachian Trail that cuts through western North Carolina near Grandfather Mountain gets busy in October. Leaf peepers mostly, people who drive up from Charlotte or Asheville for the weekend, take some photos, then head back down. I'd been living in Boone for 3 years by then, working at an outdoor gear shop, and I was tired of the crowds, tired of recommending the same 5 trails to the same types of people. So when my day off landed on a Wednesday in mid-October, I decided to do something I'd been thinking about for months. There was an old logging road I'd spotted on a USGS map from the 1960s, way up past Callaway Peak, that didn't appear on any modern trail maps. I'm not even sure why I'd been looking at vintage maps in the first place. Boredom, maybe, or just that itch to find something untouched. I parked at the standard trailhead around 7 in the morning, early enough that the lot was nearly empty. Just one other car, a sedan with Tennessee plates. The air had that perfect autumn chill that makes you glad you wore layers. I had my usual day pack, water, trail mix, first aid kit, phone battery pack, even though I knew the signal would die within the first mile. My coffee that morning had tasted slightly burnt, metallic almost, but I'd finished it anyway. I remember thinking the aftertaste was probably from the pot not being cleaned well enough. The established trail was easy for the first hour. I passed one older couple coming back down, nodded to them. The woman had a camera with a telephoto lens. She smiled at me. After that, nothing. The trail got steeper, my calves burning in that good way. When I reached the split where the official trail curved east toward the peak, I kept going straight. There was barely a path there anymore. Just a depression in the ground cover, decades of leaves and pine needles filling in where the logging road used to be. I had to check my GPS twice to make sure I was going the right direction. The forest changed pretty quickly once I left the main trail. The trees were older, thicker, less undergrowth somehow, like the canopy was so dense that nothing much could grow underneath. It got quiet too, not peaceful quiet. I've done enough solo hiking to know the difference. This was the kind of quiet where you notice the absence of birds. I stopped after maybe 30 minutes of pushing through, took a drink of water, and just listened. Nothing, no wind in the branches above, no rustle of squirrels or chipmunks in the leaves. I told myself it was just the time of day. Middle of the week, middle of a random Wednesday. Nature doesn't perform on command. But I did start walking faster after that. I found the logging road around 10:30, or what was left of it. 2 parallel depressions running through the trees, grown over, but still visible if you knew what you were looking for. I felt this little surge of satisfaction, like I'd discovered something. Following it was easier than bushwhacking, even though I had to climb over a few fallen trees. The road, if you could still call it that, curved upward along a ridge. To my left, the ground dropped away sharply into a hollow. I couldn't see the bottom through the trees. The temperature had dropped too, enough that I stopped to pull on my fleece. That's when I noticed the marks on the trees. At first, I thought they were claw marks. Bear maybe, or a bobcat sharpening on the bark. But they were too uniform, too deliberate. 4 parallel gouges about chest height, carved deep into the trunks of several trees along the road. They weren't fresh. The wood had darkened with age, but they weren't old enough to be from when this was an active road either. I reached out and touched one set, and my fingers came away with a fine dust that smelled like rot. I should have turned back then. That's what I tell people now when I talk about it, which isn't often. But at the time I convinced myself it was nothing. Probably some local kids had come up here years ago, messed around with a hatchet or something. Teenagers do dumb stuff in the woods all the time. I kept going. The hollow to my left got deeper. I could tell because the sound changed. When I kicked loose rocks, they'd tumble down the slope and I'd count the seconds before I heard them stop. 5 seconds. 7. Too far to climb down without gear. The logging road started to curve into the hillside, like it was wrapping around the hollow instead of crossing it. Smart, I thought. Whoever cut this knew the terrain. Then I found the cabin. It wasn't on the map. Not the modern one, not the vintage one. It sat about 50 yards off the logging road, tucked back in a small clearing that you wouldn't notice unless you were really looking. The structure was old, hand-hewn logs, chinking mostly gone, roof sagging in the middle. One window, no glass. The door hung at an angle on rusted hinges. I stood there on the road for a long time just staring at it. Part of me was curious. The other part, the part I should have listened to, wanted to keep walking. But I'd come this far to explore, right? To find something off the map. The clearing around the cabin was perfectly circular, which struck me as odd. The trees formed an almost exact ring, their trunks facing inward like they'd been planted that way. The ground was clear of undergrowth, just dead leaves and bare dirt. My boots sounded too loud crossing that open space. When I reached the cabin, I stood in the doorway and let my eyes adjust to the darkness inside. It was one room, dirt floor, a rusted bed frame in the corner, stripped of any mattress, a stone fireplace on the far wall, the chimney partially collapsed. Someone had scratched words into the logs near the door, but they were too worn to read. I stepped inside and the temperature dropped maybe 10 degrees. Immediately, like stepping into a refrigerator, I could see my breath, which didn't make sense. It was chilly outside, sure, but not that cold. On the floor near the fireplace, someone had arranged stones in a circle. Inside the circle were what looked like animal bones. Small ones, rabbit maybe, or squirrel. They'd been there a long time, the bones bleached and fragile looking. I crashed down to look closer, not touching anything. That's when I noticed they weren't randomly scattered. They'd been arranged, deliberately. The ribs formed radiating lines from a central point, the smaller bones placed between them in a pattern I couldn't quite figure out. It reminded me of those sacred geometry drawings you see sometimes, mandalas or something. I stood up too fast and knocked my head on a low beam. The pain was sharp enough that my eyes watered. While I was rubbing my scalp, I heard something outside. Footsteps, definitely footsteps. Slow, measured, walking across the clearing. I froze, hands still on my head, and listened. The steps stopped right outside the door. I waited for someone to say something, call out, ask if anyone was there. Normal hiker stuff. But there was just silence. And then, very slowly, the shadow of someone moved across the doorway. I couldn't see who it was. The angle was wrong and the light was behind them, but I could see their shape. Tall, very tall. Shoulders too wide to be natural, like whoever it was holding something across them. The shadow paused and I swear I felt like I was being examined. Stuttered. Then it moved past, continuing around the side of the cabin. I should have called out, said hello or something, but my mouth had gone completely dry and I couldn't seem to make myself speak. I heard the footsteps continue around the back of the cabin, the sound of them fading. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then made myself walk to the doorway and look out. Nothing. The clearing was empty. No one standing there, no one walking away through the trees. I stepped outside and walked around the cabin, looking. The ground was soft enough that my boots had left clear prints when I'd crossed the clearing. But there were no other prints anywhere, not on the path I'd approached from. Not around the cabin, not leading away into the woods, just mine. I stood there trying to rationalize it. Maybe I'd imagined the shadow. Maybe it was just a weird angle of light coming through the trees. Maybe the footsteps were an animal and I'd just misidentified the sound because I was already on edge from being in a creepy abandoned cabin. I was grasping at anything that made sense. Then I heard my name. It came from the hollow. Down in that deep cut in the mountain where the rocks fell for 7 seconds before hitting bottom, a woman's voice calling out, "Marcus," long pause, "Marcus, are you up there?" It was my sister's voice, Rebecca, who lived in Colorado and who I hadn't seen in person in almost 2 years. The voice called again, more urgent this time. "Marcus, I need help." I walked to the edge of the logging road and stared down into the trees. I couldn't see anything down there, just shadows and undergrowth getting thicker the further down it went. "Rebecca," I called back. My voice sounded weak. "I'm hurt. I fell. Please come help me." Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me that this was wrong. That my sister was not at the bottom of a hollow in western North Carolina. That voices don't just appear calling your name in the middle of nowhere. But there was this other part, this automatic part, that wanted to respond to someone calling for help. It took everything I had to step back from the edge. "Marcus, please," the voice was crying now, full sobs. "I can't move my leg, please don't leave me." I turned and walked back toward the cabin, then past it, back toward where the logging road continued into the trees. I walked fast, not quite running but close. Behind me, the voice called out 3 more times, each one more desperate than the last. Then it stopped. The walk back to the main trail took half the time it had taken to get out there. I didn't stop, didn't check my map. Just followed the logging road back until I found the place where I'd left the official trail, then practically ran down the mountain. I passed 2 different groups of hikers, and I must have looked insane, breathing hard, eyes probably wild, but I didn't stop to explain. I got to my truck, threw my pack in the back, and sat there for a solid 5 minutes before my hands stopped shaking enough to drive. I never went back to that area. Never tried to find that logging road again. For about a week, I convinced myself I'd had some kind of episode. Altitude sickness maybe, or dehydration, even though I'd been drinking plenty of water. But then I was going through my photos on my phone. I'd taken maybe a dozen shots on the hike, just scenery stuff, and I found one I didn't remember taking. It was the inside of the cabin. The angle was from near the fireplace, pointing toward the door. And in the doorway, partially visible, was something standing there. Something tall and wrong, with arms that hung almost to where its knees should be. The image was blurry, that my hand had shaken when I took it, but I could see enough. I deleted that photo immediately, but I can still see it when I close my eyes. Sometimes at night, I hear my name being called from far away, and I have to remind myself that Rebecca is safe in Colorado. That whatever used her voice that day isn't her. I moved to Virginia about 6 months later. Different mountains, different trails, but I don't go off trail anymore, not ever. Story 2. My uncle died in February and left me his property in eastern Kentucky, up past Cumberland Gap in a nowhere stretch of hills that didn't even have a name on most maps. I'd met him maybe twice in my entire life. He was my mother's older brother, the one who'd moved away from the family decades ago and basically never came back. My mom said he got strange after coming back from Vietnam, wanted isolation. I inherited the place because I was his only living relative who wasn't already dead or in prison. That's what the lawyer told me on the phone. Made me feel real good about my family tree. I drove out there in March to see what I was dealing with. The last mile was on a dirt road that barely qualified as 1 lane, deep ruts from runoff, making my sedan scrape bottom twice. The property sat in a little notch between 2 ridges, maybe 20 acres of scrub and pine. The house was bigger than I expected, 2-story, covered porch, probably built in the 30s or 40s. White paint peeling everywhere. The windows were intact, which surprised me. Usually places this remote get vandalized or picked over. I brought my girlfriend Tasha, partly for company and partly because the whole inheritance thing felt weird and I didn't want to be alone out there. She taught 4th grade and had spring break off. We'd been dating about 8 months. She grew up in Louisville, city kid through and through, and she'd been making jokes the entire drive about banjos and deliverance. I told her my uncle wasn't like that, though honestly I had no idea what he'd been like. The inside of the house was surprisingly clean, dusty sure but not trashed. The furniture was old but solid, handmade stuff, heavy oak. The kitchen still had dishes in the cabinets. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms, all of them empty except for bed frames and a few cardboard boxes. My uncle had been living here alone for almost 40 years, according to my mom. Never married, no kids. Just him and however many acres of Kentucky wilderness. I found his bedroom on the 1st floor, a small room off the kitchen with a single bed, a dresser, and about 24 paperback westerns stacked against the wall. Louis L. Amma, Zane Grey. The bed was made hospital corners, military style. On the nightstand was a compass, a flashlight, and a loaded revolver. Tasha didn't like the gun. I didn't either really, but I unloaded it and put it in my duffel bag. Didn't seem right to leave it there. We spent that first day just walking the property, trying to get a sense of the boundaries. There were survey markers, old metal posts sunk into the ground with stamped numbers. The land was mostly wooded, thick with oak and hickory. A stream ran along the eastern edge, cold and clear. I'd been half expecting junk everywhere, old cars, trash piles, that kind of thing, but it was pristine. My uncle had kept it clean, almost obsessively clean. There wasn't even much deadfall. The few fallen trees had been cut up and stacked in neat cords behind the house. What I did find were signs, dozens of them, maybe more. They were nailed to trees all along what I assumed was the property line facing outward. Hand-painted on wood planks in black letters, private property, no trespassing, keep out. Some were weathered almost blank, some looked newer. I counted at least 30 before I stopped counting. Tasha thought it was overkill. I thought it was paranoid. That night we slept in the main bedroom upstairs. I'd brought air mattresses and sleeping bags because I wasn't about to use my dead uncle's bed. The house made noises. Old places do that, settling and creaking, but nothing unusual. Around midnight I woke up needing to piss. The bathroom was downstairs, and I didn't want to turn on lights and wake Tasha, so I used my phone flashlight to navigate. On my way back up, I walked past the kitchen window and stopped. Outside at the edge of the tree line, maybe 50 yards from the house, something was standing there, just standing, motionless. It was too dark to make out details, but I could see the shape, tall, thin, human. I stared at it for probably 20 seconds, trying to decide if it was actually a person or just a tree trunk my tired brain was misinterpreting. Then it shifted, just slightly, a turn of what I assumed was its head, looking toward the house. I stepped back from the window fast enough that I bumped into the kitchen table. By the time I looked again, it was gone, or I couldn't see it anymore. I stood there in the dark for a long time listening. The house was completely silent, no sounds from outside. Eventually I went back upstairs and got into my sleeping bag, but I didn't fall asleep again until dawn started coming through the windows. The next morning, I didn't mention what I'd seen to Tasha. Partly because I wasn't sure I'd actually seen anything, and partly because she was already creeped out enough. We spent the day going through boxes in the attic, trying to figure out what was worth keeping and what was trash. Most of it was trash. Old tax documents, receipts from the 70s, expired warranties for appliances that were long gone. But in one box I found a journal. It was a standard composition notebook, the kind with the black and white speckled cover. About half the pages were filled with handwriting I assumed was my uncle's, neat block letters, all capitals. The entries weren't dated, but they seemed to span years based on how the pen ink color changed. Most of it was mundane stuff, whether observations, notes about repairs needed on the house, a few sketches of local wildlife, but toward the back the entries got stranger. One page just said, "They stay past the signs, they don't come closer but they watch." Another, "Saw 3 last night." Same ONES. They know I see them. And near the very last filled page, I don't think they're trying to scare me. I think they're waiting for what I don't know. As long as I stay inside after dark, they stay where they are. I showed the journal to Tasha. She read through it, her expression getting more and more uneasy. "Your uncle was paranoid," she said, "or had dementia or something. This isn't healthy, Marcus." "I saw something last night," I told her. "Outside, someone standing in the trees." She looked at me for a long moment. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought I was just seeing things, being tired, but now I'm not sure." We decided to leave that afternoon, pack up, lock the place, and figure out what to do with the property later. Maybe list it, maybe just let it sit. But I wanted to check the tree line first, see if there were tracks or any sign that someone had actually been standing out there. Tasha didn't want to come, so she stayed at the house while I walked out across the yard. The ground near the trees was covered in pine needles and leaves, not great for tracks. But I found the spot where I thought I'd seen the figure, lined up with the kitchen window, a clear sight line. And there, pressed into a soft patch of exposed dirt, was a footprint, bare, human-shaped but wrong. The toes were too long, splayed too wide. And the proportions were off, like someone had stretched a normal footprint lengthwise by a few inches. I crouched next to it, my heart starting to pound harder. Around that first print were others, at least 4 more, all similar. They led deeper into the woods away from the house. I should have gone back right then. Instead, I followed them. I don't know why, curiosity maybe, or just needing to prove to myself that there was an explanation, that it was a person or an animal or something normal. The prints were easy to follow for about 30 yards. Then they stopped, not faded away, not got lighter, just stopped. Mid-stride, one print then nothing, like whatever made them had simply lifted off the ground and flew away. I stood there in the trees, surrounded by quiet, and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand straight up. That's when I heard the whistle. High-pitched, melodic almost, but wrong. It came from somewhere deeper in the woods, back toward the ridge. Then another whistle answered it from a different direction. Then a third, off to my left. They weren't bird calls. They were too rhythmic, too organized, like signals. I turned and walked back toward the house, not running but moving fast. The whistles followed me, staying at the same distance. When I cleared the trees and got back into the open yard, they stopped. Tasha was standing on the porch holding her phone. "What the hell was that noise?" she asked. "We are leaving right now." We threw everything into the car in maybe 10 minutes. I didn't even lock the house, just pulled the door shut and got in the driver's seat. As I backed out and turned around to head down the dirt road, I looked in the rearview mirror. Standing at the edge of the trees were 3 figures, tall, thin, motionless, watching us leave. I pressed the accelerator harder than I needed to, and the car fishtailed in the ruts. Neither of us talked on the drive back. When we got to Louisville, Tasha said she didn't want to see me for a few days. She needed space to process. I understood. Hell, I needed space to process. I called the lawyer the next week and told him I wanted to sell the property as is. He said it might take a while to find a buyer for something that remote, but he'd listed. That was 3 months ago. No offers yet. Honestly, I don't think I'll get any. I think whatever lives on that land doesn't want anyone there. I still have the journal. Sometimes I read through it late at night, trying to understand what my uncle was dealing with for 40 years. There's one entry near the end I keep coming back to. It just says, "They've always been here. The land was theirs before it was mine. I'm the visitor, not them." Story 3. I took a job with the Forest Service in 2019, working out of a ranger station in southern West Virginia, mostly doing trail maintenance and invasive species management. Unglamorous work, but it got me outside and paid better than the warehouse job I'd had in Huntington. My supervisor was this guy named Dale Pritchard, in his 60s, been with the service for something like 35 years. He knew every trail, every creek, every hunting cabin in our district. He also had a list of places we didn't go. He never called it that explicitly, but there were certain areas that would come up during planning meetings, and Dale would just say, "We'll skip that section this year," or "That ridge doesn't need attention." It happened enough times that I noticed the pattern. There was maybe a 4-square-mile area in the northern part of our district, up near a place locals called Thornton Hollow, that we never went near. I asked him about it after a meeting one day in July. We were in his office, and I pointed to the area on the map on his wall. "We've surveyed basically everything else in our range," I said. "What's up with this part?" Dale looked at the map for a long time before he answered. "That area's fine," he said. "Doesn't get much use. No real reason to allocate resources there." "Has anyone been up there recently, like in the last 5 years?" "Sure, hunters go through, local folks. It's not restricted or anything." But something in the way he said it made it clear the conversation was over. I dropped it. For a few months anyway. In October, I was tasked with doing a wildlife camera survey. We were trying to track black bear populations and movement patterns, so the project involved setting up motion-activated cameras in different areas and collecting the data every few weeks. I had about 20 locations to cover, all marked on my GPS. It was solo work, which I preferred. Just me in the woods and the occasional deer that would startle the hell out of me. I was heading to one of my camera sites, about 3 miles up a ridge trail, when I noticed a spur trail branching off that wasn't on my map. It was faint, clearly didn't get much traffic, but it was there. Curiosity got the better of me. I checked my GPS and realized the spur headed toward the Thornton Hollow area, the place we didn't go. I stood there for probably 5 minutes, debating. Then I followed it. The trail got rougher pretty quickly, overgrown, harder to follow. I had to push through laurel thickets in a couple places, but it was definitely a trail. I could see the occasional blaze mark on trees, old and faded. After about a mile, I came out into a small clearing. In the center of it was a structure. It wasn't quite a cabin, more like a shed, maybe 8 feet square, built from stacked stone with a wooden roof that had mostly collapsed inward. No windows. One doorway, the door long gone. Moss and vines covered most of the exterior. It looked old, really old, pre-Forest Service old. I walked over to it, setting my pack down, and peered inside. The interior was empty except for debris from the collapsed roof, but the walls had markings on them, carved into the stone. Symbols I didn't recognize, geometric shapes, spirals, something that might have been writing but wasn't any alphabet I knew. They covered nearly every inch of the interior walls, floor to ceiling. I pulled out my phone to take photos, but the battery was dead even though I'd charged it that morning. I tried turning it on twice, nothing. I decided to mark the location on my GPS unit, the handheld one we used for work, and report the structure to Dale when I got back. Historical site or something, might be worth documenting. But when I pulled the GPS out of my vest pocket, the screen was cracked, completely shattered, like I'd dropped it on concrete. I hadn't dropped it. I'd been wearing it in a padded pocket the entire hike. That was the first moment I felt genuinely uneasy. 2 devices, both suddenly non-functional. I put the GPS away and looked around the clearing. It was quiet, too quiet, in that way that makes you aware of your own breathing. The trees surrounding the clearing were all the same species, white oak, and they all seemed to lean slightly inward toward the stone structure. Not dramatically, but enough that once I noticed it, I couldn't unnotice it. I decided to leave. I'd come back another day with a working camera, mark the trail properly, do it right. I picked up my pack and turned to head back the way I'd come. That's when I saw the person. They were standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 30 feet away, partially obscured by the trees. Tall, dressed in dark clothing. I couldn't make out features because of the shadows. I raised my hand in a wave, called out, "Hey, how's it going?" They didn't respond, didn't move. Just stood there. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you," I said, louder this time. "I'm with the Forest Service, just doing a survey." Still nothing. The figure didn't move at all, not even a shift in posture. I felt my throat start to get tight. Something was deeply wrong about the way they were standing, too still, too rigid, and the proportions seemed off, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly how. I started walking toward the trail, angling away from the figure, keeping them in my peripheral vision. They turned their head, just their head, the body staying motionless, to follow my movement. That's when I saw what was wrong with the proportions. The neck was too long, at least a foot longer than it should have been, the head sitting on top of it like a balloon on a string. I stopped walking. My brain was trying very hard to rationalize what I was seeing. Trick of the light, shadows, optical illusion from the angle. But the figure took a step toward me, and I saw the way it moved. The legs bent backward at the knee. The arms swung loose at its sides, reaching almost to the ground. I ran. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. I crashed through the laurel thickets, branches ripping at my face and jacket. I could hear something behind me, not footsteps, but a kind of rustling, crackling sound, like something large pushing through the undergrowth. I didn't look back. I just ran until I hit the main trail, and then I kept running until my lungs were on fire, and my legs felt like they were going to give out. I made it back to my truck in maybe half the time it should have taken. I sat in the driver's seat, shaking, trying to catch my breath. My face was bleeding from a dozen small cuts. My jacket had a long tear down one sleeve. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and barely recognized the expression I was wearing. I drove straight back to the station and went directly to Dale's office. He was at his desk, going through paperwork. I told him everything. The trail, the stone structure, the symbols, the figure. He listened without interrupting, his expression getting more and more neutral as I talked. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Did you mark the location?" he finally asked. "My GPS broke, and my phone died." He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something. "You're going to file a report about this?" "I mean, yeah, there's a historical structure up there, and something was." "Here's what you're going to do," Dale interrupted. "You're going to go home, take the rest of the day. Tomorrow you're going to come in, and we're going to move your camera locations. You've got plenty of other sites to cover. You don't need to go back to that area." "Dale, what the hell is up there?" He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. "Some places don't want to be managed," he said quietly. "Don't want to be surveyed or studied or improved. They just want to be left alone. And smart people who want to keep working in these woods, they respect that." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." He turned back to me. "You're a good worker, Kendra. You've got a future with the service if you want it, but you need to understand there are boundaries. Not all of them are marked on maps." I went home. I didn't file a report. I moved my camera locations like Dale suggested, and I never went back to Thornton Hollow. But about a week later, I was downloading data from one of my wildlife cameras, one that was a good 3 miles from where I'd had my encounter, and I found something in the footage. The camera had captured hundreds of images over the previous 2 weeks, mostly deer, a few raccoons, one black bear. And then, time-stamped at 3:47 a.m. 4 days after my encounter, there was an image of something standing directly in front of the camera. Tall, with a neck that extended upward in a way that wasn't anatomically possible. The face was turned toward the lens, but the image quality was too poor to make out details. Just pale skin and dark hollows where eyes should be. I deleted the image. I deleted the entire batch from that camera. I told Dale the memory card was corrupted. He just nodded and handed me a new one. We never talked about Thornton Hollow again. I left the Forest Service 6 months later. Took a desk job with the State Environmental Department. I still love the outdoors, still hike on weekends sometimes, but I stay on marked trails now, always. And if I see a spur trail branching off into unfamiliar territory, I keep walking. Story 4. My best friend growing up was a guy named Colin Faber. We'd been inseparable since 3rd grade, rode bikes together, camped in each other's backyards, got into the usual amount of trouble. By the time we hit our 20s, we drifted apart some. He'd gone to college in Tennessee, I'd stayed local in Southwest Virginia working construction. But we still tried to meet up a few times a year, usually to go hiking or fishing. Keep that connection alive, you know. In March of 2021, Colin called me and proposed a trip. There was this section of the Appalachian Trail in the Cherokee National Forest he'd been wanting to hit, a stretch between Damascus and Shady Valley that supposedly didn't get much traffic. We could do a 2-night backpacking loop, stay at primitive sites, really get away from everything. I'd been working 60-hour weeks, and the idea sounded perfect. We settled on a weekend in April, met up at the trailhead on a Friday morning. The weather was ideal. Mid-60s, partly cloudy, almost no wind. We hit the trail around 9 a.m., both of us carrying full packs, tent, sleeping bags, food for 3 days. The first day was exactly what I'd needed. Miles of ridge walking, views out over valleys that seemed to go on forever. We passed maybe 2 other groups of hikers the entire day. By the time we reached our planned campsite around 5 p.m., my legs were sore in that good exhausted way and my head felt clear for the first time in weeks. The site was a small clearing about 20 yards off the trail, with a stone fire ring and a bare cable for hanging food. Evidence that people used it, but not recently. The fire ring was full of old leaves. We set up the tent, hung our food, got a fire going. Colin had brought a flask of bourbon, and we passed it back and forth while the sun went down. We talked about work, relationships, his plans to maybe move back to Virginia. Normal stuff, easy stuff. Around 10 p.m., we doused the fire and turned in. The tent was a 2-person, cramped but functional. I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up maybe 3 hours later needing to piss. Colin was snoring softly beside me. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped out into the cold air. It had gotten significantly colder. I could see my breath in the moonlight. I walked about 15 feet from the tent, far enough to be polite, and took care of business. That's when I heard the whistling. It was coming from somewhere down the slope below our campsite. High-pitched, melodic, almost like a bird call. But it was the middle of the night. Birds don't sing at 2 in the morning. I stood there listening and it came again. The same pattern, the same notes. Then from a different direction, maybe 50 yards to the east, another whistle answered, same melody, like a call and response. I got back to the tent quickly. Colin was still asleep. I lay there in my sleeping bag listening. The whistling continued for maybe 10 minutes, moving in a slow circle around our campsite. Never getting closer, never getting further away, just circling. Eventually it stopped and I fell back asleep, though not comfortably. The next morning Colin asked if I'd heard anything weird during the night. I told him about the whistling. He'd heard it too, though he hadn't gotten up. Probably owls or something, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. We broke camp and continued on the trail. The plan was to hike about 8 miles to the next site, spend Saturday night there, then loop back to the car on Sunday. The second day's hiking was tougher. More elevation gain, rockier trail. We stopped for lunch around noon at an overlook, eating trail mix and rehydrating. From where we sat, we could see the valley below and the ridge we'd be following that afternoon. The view was beautiful, but something about it felt wrong. I couldn't pinpoint what. Colin felt it too. "Does the woods seem quiet to you?" he asked. He was right. I hadn't noticed until he said it, but there were no bird sounds, no insects, just wind in the trees and our own breathing. We sat there for maybe 20 minutes and didn't hear a single animal sound. Eventually we packed up and kept going, but the unease stuck with me. We reached the second campsite around 4 p.m. This one was more developed, an actual clearing with a fire ring, a small stream nearby for water. There was also a primitive shelter, 3-sided, open to the front, just a roof and a raised wooden floor. Colin suggested we sleep in the shelter instead of pitching the tent. It would be easier and warmer with the extra insulation from the wood. I agreed. We spent the evening filtering water, making dinner, talking less than the night before. The silence in the woods was getting to both of us, though neither of us wanted to admit it. By 9 p.m. it was fully dark, and we'd settled into our sleeping bags in the shelter. I had a headlamp but turned it off to save batteries. The darkness was absolute, no moon that night, no stars visible through the trees. I was drifting off when I heard the whistling again. Same melody as the night before, but this time it was closer, much closer, maybe 20 yards from the shelter. Colin heard it too. I felt him go rigid in his sleeping bag next to me. We both lay there, not moving, barely breathing. The whistle came again, circling the shelter slowly. Then another whistle answered from the opposite side, then a third from behind the shelter. "What the fuck?" Colin whispered. Before I could answer, something hit the roof, hard, like someone had thrown a rock. Then another impact on the other side. Then scratching sounds like nails on wood, running along the edge of the shelter's roof. I fumbled for my headlamp and turned it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees in front of the shelter. Nothing there. The scratching stopped. The whistling stopped. Everything went silent. We sat up, both of us, backs against the rear wall of the shelter. Colin had his headlamp on too now, both of us scanning the darkness. "We should get out of here," he said. His voice was shaking. "Pack up and hike out, right now. In the dark, on that trail, we'll break an ankle or worse." "I don't care, I want to leave." Before we could decide, we heard footsteps, not animal footsteps. These were bipedal, slow, deliberate, walking around the perimeter of the clearing. I swung my headlamp toward the sound and caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees, tall, pale. It ducked behind a trunk before I could see details. "There's someone out there," Colin said. "Hey," he shouted. "We are campers, this is our site." The footsteps stopped. Then, from the darkness, a voice called back, "Colin." It was Colin's voice. Identical, calling his own name. Colin went absolutely white. "What the hell?" he whispered. "What the hell is that?" The voice called again, from a different location this time. "Colin, where are you? I'm lost." Then another voice joined in. My voice. Josh, help me, I can't find the trail." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Whatever was out there was using our voices, mimicking us, and there were multiple somethings because the voices were coming from different directions. Colin grabbed my arm. "We run," he said. "On 3, we grab our packs and we run for the trail. Don't stop, don't look back." I nodded. We counted down together, barely audible. On 3, we burst out of the shelter, grabbed our packs from where we'd left them, and sprinted toward where the trail entered the clearing. Behind us, I heard the voices again, overlapping now, calling our names in our own voices. And underneath that, the whistling, all around us. We hit the trail and ran. Our headlamps bounced wildly, illuminating patches of trail and rock and tree. I stumbled twice, caught myself. Colin was ahead of me, moving fast. I could hear things in the woods on either side of the trail pacing us, not chasing exactly but following, keeping up effortlessly. When I glanced to my left, I saw something tall loping between the trees, its limbs too long, moving in a way that wasn't natural. We ran for maybe 30 minutes straight. I don't know how far we covered, miles probably. Eventually the trail opened up into a wider area and we burst through into an established campsite. A big one with multiple tents, a group of maybe 6 or 7 people sitting around a fire. They all turned to stare at us as we stumbled into their camp, gasping wild-eyed. "Jesus, are you guys okay?" one of them asked, standing up. We couldn't answer immediately, just stood there, bent over, trying to catch our breath. When I finally looked back at the trail we'd come from, there was nothing. No sounds of pursuit, no movement in the trees, just darkness and silence. The group gave us water, let us sit by their fire. We told them we'd gotten spooked by an animal, thought it was a bear. Didn't mention the voices or the whistling or what we'd seen. They were sympathetic, offered to let us stay at their site for the night. We accepted. Colin and I barely slept, taking turns keeping watch even though we were surrounded by other people. At first light, we packed up and hiked straight back to the trailhead. Didn't talk much. When we got to the parking lot, Colin turned to me and said, "We don't tell anyone about this, not the real version. People will think we're crazy." I agreed. We said our goodbyes and I drove home. But about a week later, I got a text from Colin. Just a photo, no message. It was a screenshot from his phone's voice memo app. There was a recording from the night we'd been in the shelter, time-stamped around 10 p.m. The file was 11 minutes long. Colin had apparently hit record at some point, maybe by accident. I called him immediately. "Did you listen to it?" "Yeah," he said. "You need to listen to it too." I downloaded the file and played it. For the first minute, it was just silence and the sound of us breathing in our sleeping bags. Then the whistling started, clear as day even through the phone's microphone. Then the impacts on the roof. Then the scratching. And then around the 8-minute mark, the voices. Colin's voice calling his name, my voice calling mine. But underneath those voices, layered beneath them, there were other sounds, like dozens of voices whispering in unison. Saying things I couldn't quite make out. I deleted the recording. Colin did too. We both agreed we never wanted to hear it again. I haven't been backpacking since. Colin moved to North Carolina and got really into rock climbing, indoor gym climbing. Nothing that involves sleeping alone in the woods. We still talk occasionally, but we never bring up that trip. There's nothing left to say about it. We both know what we heard. We both know something was out there, using us as bait for each other. And we both know we got incredibly lucky to get out. Story 5. I was 23 when I got hired as a field assistant for a wildlife biology project, studying salamander populations in the southern Appalachians. The team was based out of a university in North Carolina, and the project involved hiking into remote areas, conducting surveys, collecting samples. It was grunt work mostly, long days in the woods, low pay, but I just graduated with a biology degree and needed experience. The lead researcher was a woman named Dr. Helena Grave, mid-50s, sharp as hell, completely no-nonsense. She'd been doing fieldwork in Appalachia for 30 years. In June, Dr. Grave assigned me to a solo survey in a section of the Nantahala National Forest. There was a series of small streams in a drainage basin that hadn't been surveyed in over a decade, and she wanted baseline data. The area was accessible only by an unmaintained trail, about 5 miles from the nearest road. I'd be camping 2 nights, conducting surveys during the day. Solo work was unusual for field assistants, but I'd proven myself capable on previous trips, and Dr. Grave said she trusted me. I hiked in on a Monday morning, carrying a 40-pound pack with camping gear, sampling equipment, and enough food for 3 days. The trail was rough but manageable. The weather was hot and humid, typical for June in the mountains. By early afternoon, I'd reached the drainage basin and set up my camp on a flat spot near the confluence of 2 streams. The forest was thick, rhododendron and mountain laurel forming almost impenetrable walls on either side of the water. Beautiful but claustrophobic. I spent the rest of that day conducting surveys. The work was methodical. Walk stream sections, flit rocks, identify salamander species, record data, take tissue samples for DNA analysis. I found 4 species, all expected for the area. Nothing remarkable. By evening, I was exhausted, covered in mud, and had maybe 100 mosquito bites. I cooked dinner dehydrated chili that tasted like salty cardboard and was in my tent by 9 p.m. Sometime deep in the night, I woke up to the sound of something moving outside my tent. Footsteps, definitely, slow and deliberate, circling the tent. My first thought was bear. I lay perfectly still, listening. Bears usually make a lot of noise, snorting, snuffling, crashing through undergrowth. This was quiet, methodical. The footsteps stopped directly outside the tent door. I waited for the sound of claws scratching at the fabric or the heavy breathing of a large animal. Instead, I heard a voice. "Are you awake?" It was a man's voice. Calm, conversational, like he was asking if I wanted coffee. I didn't answer. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "I know you're awake. I can hear you breathing." I fumbled for my headlamp, turned it on, and pointed it at the tent door. The light illuminated the fabric, but I couldn't see through it. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "I'm a hiker. I saw your tent. I'm lost. Do you have a map?" Something about the voice was wrong. Too calm, too flat, like someone reading from a script. I didn't believe for a second that it was a lost hiker. "I don't have a map," I lied. "You should keep following the stream downhill. It'll take you to the main trail." Silence. Then the footsteps resumed, walking away from the tent. I listened as they receded into the distance. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just sat there with my headlamp on, a canister of bear spray in my hand, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally came up, I unzipped the tent and looked around. The forest looked normal. Peaceful, even, morning light filtering through the canopy, birds starting to call. I walked a slow circle around my tent, looking for tracks. The ground near the stream was soft mud, and I found my own boot prints clearly visible. But there were no other prints, not anywhere near the tent, not on any of the approaches, just mine. I told myself I'd dreamed it. Vivid nightmare brought on by exhaustion and sleeping alone in the woods. I'd had weird dreams on field assignments before. I made coffee, ate breakfast, and started my surveys for the day. The work was distracting. I was checking a section of stream maybe half a mile from camp when I found the first cloth. It was tied to a tree branch overhanging the water. A strip of fabric, maybe 6 inches long, bleached white. At first I thought it was trash, someone's bandana or piece of shirt left behind. But when I looked closer, I saw there were marks on it. Symbols drawn in something dark, not paint. The marks were crude, like they'd been drawn with a finger. I didn't touch it, just took a photo for my records and moved on. I found 2 more within the next hour. Same type of fabric, same symbols, all of them tied to branches over the water at roughly even intervals, marking something. The stream, the territory. I didn't know, but the unease from the previous night came flooding back. I checked my GPS unit. I was still within my survey area, right where I was supposed to be, but suddenly I wanted very badly to be somewhere else. I decided to cut the day short and head back to camp. I'd pack up and hike out that afternoon, a day early. Dr. Grave would understand, or she wouldn't, but I didn't care. As I walked back along the stream, I kept seeing more of the fabric strips. Dozens of them. I hadn't noticed them on my way up that morning. Either I'd missed them, possible I'd been focused on the water, or they'd been placed while I was working. When I got back to camp, my tent was open. Not just unzipped, completely open, both doors pulled back and tied to the guy lines. I know I'd zipped it shut that morning. I'm obsessive about it because of bugs. I approached slowly, bear spray in hand. Nothing inside. My sleeping bag was still there, my gear undisturbed. But sitting on top of my sleeping bag was a salamander. A big one, maybe 7 inches long. Jordan's salamander, distinctive red cheek patches. It was dead. Its body had been arranged in a perfect spiral, tail curling in on itself. I backed away from the tent. I didn't touch the salamander. I didn't pack my gear. I just grabbed my day pack with my water and GPS and started hiking out. Fast. I didn't run, but I walked as quickly as the terrain allowed. The 5 miles back to the trailhead felt like 20. Every sound made me flinch. Every time the trail curved, I was convinced something would be standing there waiting for me. I made it to my truck around 4 p.m. Threw my day pack in the back, got in, locked the doors. I drove straight to the university and went to Dr. Grave's office. She was there working late, and she looked surprised to see me. I told her everything. The voice at night, the fabric strips, the salamander in my tent. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That drainage has a history." "What kind of history?" 3 graduate students have done work there over the past 30 years. All of them reported unusual experiences. One left after a single night. Another completed the survey but refused to go back. The third, a young man named Peter something, this was in the 90s, we lost contact with him for 2 days. When he finally hiked out, he wouldn't talk about what happened. He left the program entirely. "And you sent me there anyway." I thought the reports were exaggerated. People spook themselves in the woods, you know how it is. She paused. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have sent you in alone." I asked her what she thought the fabric strips meant. She said she didn't know. Local folklore, maybe, some kind of territorial marking. There are stories about certain hollers in Appalachia being claimed by things that predate European settlement, things that don't want to be studied or documented. She didn't say she believed the stories, but she didn't say she didn't believe them either. I told her I was done with fieldwork. She understood. She paid me for the full 3-day assignment, even though I'd cut it short. I never went back to retrieve my tent or the rest of my gear. As far as I know, it's still there. Or maybe it is. Maybe whatever lives in that drainage took it, the same way it took the salamander and arranged it as a message. I work in a lab now. Indoor work, climate control, no camping. I still love biology, still care about conservation. But I've accepted that there are some places that don't want to be studied, some questions that shouldn't be asked, and some areas of the mountains that are claimed by things that were there long before us and will be there long after we're gone. Story 6. My dad died in October, and in his will he left me his hunting cabin in eastern Tennessee. The cabin sat on about 40 acres near Frozen Head State Park, property that had been in his family for 3 generations. I'd been there maybe twice as a kid, both times in summer. It was a small place, 1 room, wood stove, no electricity or running water. My dad used it during deer season, and from what I understood, not much else. he wasn't the sentimental type. The fact that he'd left it to me instead of selling it surprised me. I drove out there in early November to see what kind of condition it was in. I was 29, living in Knoxville, working as a paralegal. The drive took about 2 hours through increasingly rural roads until I turned onto a gravel forest road that climbed for 3 miles. The cabin appeared suddenly through the trees, small, weathered, surrounded by oak and pine. Someone had been maintaining it. The roof looked solid and the porch wasn't sagging. I later found out my uncle had been checking on it every few months. The interior was Spartan. A bed frame with a thin mattress, a table, 2 chairs, shelves stocked with canned goods and water jugs, a dozen candles in glass jars. The wood stove looked functional. On the wall above the bed was a rack holding 2 rifles, a .3006 and a .22, and boxes of ammunition on the shelf below. I'm not a gun person, but I knew my dad had been a careful man. If he'd left them loaded, there would have been a reason. I checked. Both were loaded. I spent that first day cleaning, sweeping out mouse droppings, airing out the musty smell. By late afternoon, the place looked livable. I'd brought supplies for an overnight stay, sleeping bag, food, a book. My plan was to spend one night, get a feel for the place, then decide whether to keep it or list it. The property had value, but part of me liked the idea of having a remote retreat. Somewhere to disappear, to when Knoxville got too loud. As the sun started to set, I realized how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, oppressive quiet. No birds, no insects, no rustling in the undergrowth. Just wind in the trees and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. I got a fire going in the stove, made dinner, sat at the table reading by candlelight. Around 8 p.m. I heard the first knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the cabin door. I looked up from my book, confused. I hadn't heard a vehicle approach. The nearest neighbor was miles away. I walked to the door and called out, "Who's there?" No answer. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then opened the door. The porch was empty. The forest beyond was dark, the tree line maybe 20 yards away. I stood there, letting my eyes adjust, and saw nothing. No movement, no lights, no indication anyone was there. I closed the door and went back to my book. 10 minutes later, the knocking came again. Same pattern, 3 slow knocks. This time I didn't call out. I grabbed one of the flashlights from the shelf, opened the door quickly, and shone the light across the porch and into the trees. Nothing. I walked around the perimeter of the cabin, checking all sides. No footprints in the dirt. No broken branches, nothing. Back inside, I locked the door, a simple sliding bolt, and tried to focus on my book. The knocking didn't come again for over an hour. When it did, it was louder. 3 heavy blows that rattled the door in its frame. I stood up, my heart pounding, and faced the door. "I don't know what you want," I said loudly, "but you need to leave. This is private property." From the other side of the door, a voice answered. "Let me in, Nathan." It was my father's voice. I felt my legs go weak. My dad had been dead for 6 weeks. I'd been at his funeral. I'd watched them lower the casket into the ground. The voice came again, muffled through the wood. "Nathan, it's cold out here. Let me in." I backed away from the door, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't real, couldn't be real. I grabbed the .3006 from the rack, fumbled with it until I was sure a round was chambered, and pointed it at the door. My hands were shaking badly. "You're not my father," I said, my voice cracking. "Of course I am. I need to talk to you. It's important." "My father is dead." Silence long enough that I thought maybe whatever it was had left. Then the doorknob started to turn. Slowly, testing. The bolt held, but I watched the knob twist all the way to the right, then back to the left. The door shook as something pushed against it. Not violently, but with steady pressure. Testing the strength of the bolt, I raised the rifle to my shoulder, sighting down the barrel at the door. "I will shoot," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm armed. Leave now." The pressure stopped. The doorknob went still. Then I heard footsteps on the porch, walking from the door toward the side of the cabin. I tracked the sound, moving to keep the rifle pointed at the wall closest to the footsteps. They stopped at the window. The cabin had 2 windows, one on each side. No glass, just shutters that latched from the inside. The shutters on the side windows started to rattle. Something was pulling at them, trying to force them open. I crossed to the window and held the rifle with one hand while pressing my weight against the shutters with the other. "Go away," I shouted. The rattling intensified, the wood creaking, then it stopped. I heard the footsteps move to the back of the cabin, to the second window. That one started rattling too. For the next hour, whatever was outside circled the cabin, testing the door, pulling at the shutters, occasionally calling out in my father's voice. Sometimes it would say my name. Sometimes it would say things my father used to say. "Nathan, get out here and help me with this." "Oh boy, you're testing my patience." Perfect mimicry. If I'd closed my eyes, I would have sworn it was him. Around midnight, everything went silent. I sat on the bed, rifle across my lap, staring at the door. I was exhausted, but there was no way I could sleep. I kept the stove fire going, kept the candles lit. The silence stretched on, hours. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I jerked awake to pale dawn light coming through gaps in the shutters. I waited until full daylight before I unbolted the door and stepped outside. The porch was empty. I walked around the cabin, examining the ground. The dirt around the foundation was scuffed and disturbed, but there were no clear footprints, just drag marks, like something had been pulled across the surface. The base of the side window, I found deep gouges in the wood, 4 parallel grooves, like someone had raked their fingernails down the shutter. The wood was fresh and pale where it had been carved away. I packed my things in under 10 minutes. I didn't clean up, didn't organize anything. Just grabbed my sleeping bag and food and got in my truck. As I was driving down the gravel road away from the cabin, I stopped about halfway down and looked back. Standing at the tree line near the cabin was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, watching me leave. I couldn't make out features from that distance, but I knew it wasn't human. The proportions were wrong. I pressed the accelerator and didn't look back again. I called my uncle that afternoon and told him I wanted to sell the property. He asked if I was sure. It was family land after all. I said I was sure. He handled the sale for me. It took 8 months to find a buyer, and when it finally sold, it went for significantly less than market value. I didn't care, I just wanted it gone. About a year later, my uncle called me. The people who'd bought the cabin were complaining about vandalism. Someone kept knocking on the door at night, pulling at the shutters. They'd called the sheriff multiple times, but no one was ever found. They wanted out of the contract, but legally they were stuck. My uncle asked if I'd experienced anything like that during my visit. I told him no. I told him I'd spent a quiet night there and left because the isolation didn't suit me. It was easier than explaining, easier than admitting that something in those woods had known my father's voice, had known his mannerisms, and had used them to try to get inside. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know what it would have done if I'd opened that door, and I'm grateful I never found out. Story 7. In the summer of 2018, I was working for a survey company that did boundary and topographical work for landowners across the southern Appalachians. The job involved a lot of hiking with GPS equipment and surveying tools, mapping property lines, marking corners. It was good money and got me outdoors, which beat sitting in an office. My partner on most jobs was a guy named Travis Chen, mid-30s, former Army engineer. Competent, reliable, didn't talk much. We worked maybe a dozen projects together by July. We got contracted to survey a large parcel in southwestern Virginia, maybe 200 acres of forested mountain land. The owner was an LLC based out of Richmond, planning to subdivide and sell off smaller lots. Our job was to walk the existing boundary, verify the corners matched the deed description, and create an updated map. Pretty standard work. The property was remote, about an hour from the nearest town, on progressively worse roads, but we dealt with worse. We drove in on a Monday morning, parking where the access road ended in a small clearing. The plan was to work Monday through Wednesday, camping on the property to save the drive time. We brought a 2-person tent, food, and all our surveying equipment. The weather was hot and humid, temperatures in the low 90s. We started working right away, following the southern boundary line eastward into the forest. The terrain was rough, steep slopes, thick undergrowth, down trees everywhere. We were constantly climbing over or detouring around obstacles. The boundary itself was marked by old survey blazes on trees, hatchet marks that had scarred over, but were still visible if you knew what to look for. Some of the blazes looked ancient, probably from the original survey in the 1800s. By late afternoon, we'd covered maybe a third of the southern line and were deep into the property. We decided to make camp near a small creek that crossed the boundary. The site was decent, relatively flat ground, water access open enough to set up the tent. We got everything set up, filtered water, made dinner. Travis was even quieter than usual, and when I asked if something was wrong, he just shrugged and said the woods felt off. I knew what he meant but couldn't articulate it either. Just a vibe, too quiet maybe, or too dark under the canopy. We turned in around 9 p.m. I fell asleep quickly despite the heat. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke to Travis shaking my shoulder. "Listen," he whispered. I lay there disoriented, trying to focus. Then I heard footsteps outside the tent, multiple sets walking around the perimeter. Slow, deliberate, circling us. "Animals," I whispered. "No, listen to the pattern. That's bipedal." He was right. The rhythm was wrong for quadrupeds. These were footsteps, human footsteps, or something that walked like a human. We lay there, not moving, listening to them circle the tent twice. Then they stopped. Silence, long, oppressive silence. Then something scraped against the side of the tent, a slow, dragging sound like nails on fabric. Travis had a pistol in his pack. He carried it on jobs in remote areas for wildlife. He pulled it out and held it ready. "Who's out there?" he called loudly. No answer. The scraping sound moved to the tent door, then stopped. We waited, barely breathing. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps resumed, moving away from the tent and fading into the distance. We didn't sleep the rest of the night, just sat there with the pistol and a flashlight waiting for dawn. When the sun finally came up, we unzipped the tent and looked around. The ground near the creek was soft mud, and we found our own boot prints from setting up camp. But there were others too. Barefoot prints, human-shaped but too large, maybe size 15 or 16. They circled the tent multiple times, then led off into the woods heading north. "We should leave," Travis said. "Pack up and get out of here." I wanted to agree, but we had a contract. 2 more days of work to finish the survey. If we bylate, the company wouldn't pay us, and we'd probably lose the contract entirely. I suggested we work during the day and leave at night, drive out and stay at a motel. Travis agreed to that. We spent the day continuing the boundary survey, moving along the eastern edge of the property. The blazes were harder to find here, some of them completely grown over. We were relying heavily on the GPS and the deed description. Around noon, we found the northeast corner, a stone cairn that had been documented in the original survey. Beside it was something that hadn't been documented, a post. It was a wooden post, maybe 6 feet tall, driven into the ground. From the top of it hung strips of cloth, dozens of them tied at intervals down the length of the post. They were weathered and faded, but I could see dark marks on some of them, symbols or writing, too worn to read. The setup reminded me of Tibetan prayer flags, but the vibe was all wrong. This wasn't religious, it was a warning. "We need to document this," I said, pulling out my camera. "No," Travis said, "we don't touch it, we don't photograph it, we mark this corner and move on. It's on the property, it's our job to." "I don't care, we're not documenting that." I'd never seen Travis refuse to do something work-related. He was usually by the book to a fault, but the look on his face made it clear this wasn't negotiable. We recorded the corner's GPS coordinates and moved on. The western boundary was the longest stretch, running almost a mile through dense forest. We were behind schedule, and it was getting late in the afternoon. We pushed hard to finish, moving faster than was safe on the terrain. That's when I saw the structure. It was maybe 50 yards off the boundary line, deeper into the property. A small building, or what was left of one. Stone foundation, partially collapsed walls. I stopped and pointed it out to Travis. "Should we check it out? Might be relevant to the survey." "It's not on the boundary, not our problem." But I was already walking toward it. I don't know why, curiosity maybe, or just wanting to understand what the hell was going on with this property. Travis followed reluctantly. As we got closer, I could see the structure was old, maybe 100 years, maybe more. The walls were made of stacked stone, no mortar. What remained of the roof had collapsed inward. There was no door, just an opening. I stepped inside. The floor was dirt, covered in leaves and debris. The walls had carvings on them, hundreds of them. Symbols, figures, writing in a language I didn't recognize. Some of the carvings looked fresh, the stone still pale where it had been worked. Others were ancient, covered in lichen. In the center of the floor was a depression, maybe 3 feet across, filled with ashes. A fire pit. "People still use this place," I said. "Look at the ashes, they're not old." Travis was standing in the doorway, not coming inside. "We're leaving now. Just give me a minute, I want to get some photos. I'm going back to the truck, you can come or not." He turned and walked away. I stood there for a moment, alone in the structure, and felt the temperature drop. Not gradually, instantly, like I'd stepped into a freezer. My breath misted in front of my face. I heard a sound behind me from the back corner of the structure, a wet dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across dirt. I turned slowly. The corner was dark, the collapsed roof blocking most of the light, but I could see movement, something pale rising from the ground. Not standing, unfolding, like it had been compressed and was now expanding upward. Limbs extending, joints bending in ways that weren't right. I saw a hand first, too many fingers, too long, then an arm, then a shoulder. The thing was huge, at least 7 feet tall, and it was looking at me. I ran, I crashed through the doorway and sprinted toward where I'd left Travis. I could hear something behind me, not footsteps, but a rustling, sliding sound, like a snake moving through leaves, but massive. I didn't look back. I just ran until I caught up with Travis. He took one look at my face and started running too. We made it back to the truck in maybe 20 minutes, both of us gasping, covered in sweat. We threw our equipment in the back and got in. Travis started the engine, and we drove down the access road as fast as the terrain allowed. Neither of us spoke until we were back on paved road. Then Travis said, "What did you see?" "I don't know, something in the structure, something big." "We are not going back." "Agreed." We called the company that evening and told them we couldn't complete the survey. Equipment malfunction, unsafe conditions, vague excuses. They were pissed, but we didn't care. We split the partial payment they gave us for the work we'd done and agreed never to talk about what happened. About 2 months later, I got a call from the project manager. He said the client had hired another crew to finish the survey. That crew had bylaid after 1 day, claiming the property was unsafe. The client was now threatening to sue our company for breach of contract. Did I have any insight into why multiple professional surveying crews couldn't complete a straightforward boundary survey? I told him I didn't. I told him the property was remote and the terrain was challenging. I didn't mention the footprints or the post with the cloth or the thing I'd seen unfolding in that ruined structure. Some things are better left unexplained. I heard later that the client abandoned the subdivision plan and sold the property as is to a private buyer. I have no idea who would buy land like that. Someone who doesn't know, or someone who does know and has their own reasons. Either way, I'm glad it's not my problem anymore. Story 8. I spent my 25th birthday hiking alone in the Pisgah National Forest, which probably says something about my social life at the time. I'd moved to Asheville the year before for a job in graphic design that I already hated, and my main escape was hiking. I'd done most of the popular trails, Looking Glass, Graveyard Fields, Black Balsam, and was itching to find something more isolated. I'd been scrolling through trail forums and found references to an old fire tower access road that hadn't been maintained since the 70s. The road supposedly led to an abandoned tower on a peak that didn't even have a name on modern maps. Exactly the kind of place I wanted to spend my birthday. I started the hike around 8 a.m. on a Saturday in September. The weather was perfect, mid-60s, clear skies. The access road was easy to find, though the Forest Service had put up a sign saying "Road closed, not maintained." I walked around the gate and started up. The old road was overgrown but still visible, cutting up the mountainside in long switchbacks. I didn't see any other footprints in the mud. Good, I wanted solitude. The climb took about 3 hours. By the time I reached the top, my legs were burning and I'd gone through most of my water. The fire tower came into view through the trees, a steel structure maybe 60 feet tall, orange with rust, the cab at the top still intact but clearly abandoned. The windows were boarded up. The stairs looked sketchy but probably climbable. I walked around the base, taking photos, enjoying the isolation. That's when I noticed the camp. It was set up maybe 30 yards from the tower, tucked into a small clearing. A tent, a good quality one, probably a big Agnes or similar. A campfire ring with fresh ashes, a backpack hanging from a tree branch. Someone was staying here. I called out, "Hello, anyone here?" No answer. The tent flap was closed. I walked over and knocked on one of the poles. "Hey, sorry to intrude. Just wanted to say hi." Still nothing. I assumed whoever it was had gone for a hike, maybe to another peak. I left the camp alone and climbed the fire tower stairs. They were solid enough, though some of the bolts were missing and the whole structure swayed in the wind. I made it to the cab at the top and looked out through the gaps in the boarded windows. The view was incredible, ridge after ridge of mountains stretching to the horizon. I stayed up there for maybe half an hour, eating lunch, enjoying the quiet. When I climbed back down, I noticed the tent flap was open. Someone was back. I walked over and called out again. "Hey, I'm Brianna. I hiked up for the day. Didn't mean to disturb your camp." A voice from inside the tent said, "You're not disturbing me." It was a man's voice, calm, friendly even, but something about it made me uneasy. I couldn't pinpoint why. "Cool," I said. "Great spot you've got here. How long you staying?" "As long as I need to." "Right, well, I'm heading back down soon. Just wanted to introduce myself." "You don't want to leave yet," the voice said. "It's getting late, you should stay." I looked at my watch. It was barely 2 p.m. I've got plenty of time to get down before dark. "Stay." The way he said it, flat, no inflection, sent a chill down my spine. I backed away from the tent. "Thanks, but I'm good. Have a nice day." I turned and walked quickly toward the access road. Behind me, I heard the tent unzip. I glanced back and saw a figure step out. Tall, dressed in dark clothing, face obscured by a hood. He was just standing there watching me. I waved awkwardly and kept walking. When I looked back again a few seconds later, he was still standing in the same spot, not moving, just staring. I started down the access road at a fast pace, my heart pounding. I told myself I was overreacting. Solo male camper, acts a little weird, big deal. Lots of people are socially awkward in the woods, but that voice kept replaying in my head. "You should stay," like it wasn't a suggestion, like it was an instruction. I'd been descending for maybe 20 minutes when I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped and looked back, nobody there. The road curved out of sight about 50 yards back, so I couldn't see far. I kept going, faster now. The footsteps resumed, faster too, matching my pace. I stopped again. They stopped. "This is stupid," I muttered to myself. "It's just paranoia." But when I started walking again, the footsteps started too, and they were closer. I could hear them clearly now, the crunch of gravel, the snap of twigs. Someone was following me. I spun around, ready to confront whoever it was, and saw nothing. The road behind me was empty, but I heard breathing, close, maybe 10 feet away, heavy, rhythmic breathing. I ran. I didn't care about looking foolish or brave or capable. I just ran. The breathing sound followed me, staying just behind, never quite catching up but never falling behind either. I could hear footsteps now, fast and heavy, and something else. A dragging sound, like something was being pulled along the ground. I ran until my lungs were on fire and my legs felt like they'd collapse. The access road seemed longer than it had on the way up, like it was stretching out ahead of me. I kept expecting to see the gate, the trailhead, my car, but the road just kept going. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was probably 15 minutes, I saw the gate. I practically threw myself over it and ran to my car. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them, picked them up, unlocked the door. As I got in and locked it behind me, I looked back at the access road. Standing at the gate was the figure from the camp. Same dark clothing, same hood, just standing there motionless, watching. I started the car and drove away, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I didn't hike alone for a long time after that. When I finally did start again, I stuck to popular trails, crowded ones, and I never went back to that fire tower. But about 6 months later, I was reading a hiking forum and someone posted about the same area. They'd gone up to the tower and found a camp, tent, backpack, fire ring, but everything was old. The tent was partially collapsed, the backpack was sun-faded and torn, and there were no signs anyone had been there recently. The poster was asking if anyone knew who might have abandoned their gear. I wanted to reply, to tell them to leave it alone, to not stay up there after dark, but I didn't, because I didn't know what to say. I don't know who or what was at that camp when I visited. I don't know if the gear they found was the same camp I saw, and I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed like the voice told me to. I'm just grateful I ran. Story 9. In the fall of 2020, my boyfriend at the time, Derek Paulson, convinced me to go camping with him in the Cherokee National Forest. We'd been dating about 4 months, and the relationship was already starting to feel strained. Different interests, different long-term goals, that kind of thing. But he loved the outdoors and kept talking about this spot he'd found near Bald River Falls, a little-used area where we could camp without dealing with crowds. I agreed, partly because I needed to figure out if the relationship was worth continuing, and partly because I'd been cooped up inside for months due to the pandemic and needed to get out. We drove out on a Friday afternoon in mid-October. The fall colors were at their peak. the forest ablaze with reds and oranges. Derek had been there once before in summer and claimed he knew the way. We parked at a public lot near the falls and hiked in carrying our gear. The trail was easy for the first mile, well-maintained and clearly marked. Then Derek led us off onto what he said was a shortcut. The trail got fainter, harder to follow. I asked if he was sure this was right. He insisted he'd taken the same route before. After about 45 minutes of bushwhacking, we emerged into a small clearing. Derek said this was the spot. I wasn't thrilled. The area felt closed in, the trees dense around us, but it was getting late and I didn't want to keep arguing. We set up the tent, built a fire, cooked dinner. The conversation was stilted. We'd run out of easy things to talk about weeks ago, and now being alone together in the woods just highlighted how little we had in common. By 9 p.m., we were in the tent, lying in our sleeping bags, not touching. Derek fell asleep quickly. I lay there staring at the tent ceiling, wondering why I'd agreed to this trip. Around 11, I heard something outside. Voices, faint, but definitely voices. Multiple people talking, the words too low to make out. I sat up and listened. The voices seemed to be coming from somewhere past the clearing, deeper in the woods. I unzipped the tent quietly and stepped out. The fire had burned down to coals, giving off just enough light to see the immediate area. The voices continued, rising and falling. I couldn't tell how many speakers there were, maybe 3 or 4. They didn't sound distressed or loud, just conversational. Like people sitting around a campfire talking. I walked to the edge of the clearing, following the sound. The voices were clearer now, but I still couldn't make out words. It was like they were speaking in a language I almost understood, but not quite. I pushed through some undergrowth and found a faint trail leading further into the woods. The voices were coming from that direction. I should have woken Derek, should have gone back to the tent and stayed there, but I was curious. And honestly, part of me wanted an excuse to be away from him. I followed the trail for maybe 200 yards. It opened into another clearing, larger than the one we'd camped in. In the center was a fire, a big one, flames reaching 6 feet high. Around the fire were figures. I counted 5 of them sitting in a circle. They were dressed in dark clothing, cloaks or blankets, I couldn't tell. Their backs were to me. Voices were coming from them, rhythmic and overlapping, almost like chanting. I stood at the edge of the clearing watching. Part of me recognized this was intrusive, that I was stumbling onto some kind of private gathering, maybe a religious ceremony, but I couldn't make myself leave. There was something hypnotic about the scene. The figures swayed slightly as they chanted, the firelight casting long shadows. Then in unison they stopped, complete silence. And then one by one they turned to look at me. I couldn't see their faces. The firelight was behind them, throwing their features into shadow, but I could feel them looking, staring, waiting. One of them stood up and I saw how tall they were, at least 7 feet, maybe more. The figure took a step toward me and that broke the spell. I turned and ran. I crashed back through the undergrowth, branches tearing at my face and clothes. I could hear movement behind me, not footsteps exactly, but rustling. Lots of it, like multiple somethings were following me. I didn't look back. I just ran until I burst into our clearing and nearly collided with the tent. Derek was still asleep. I shook him awake. We need to leave, right now. He was groggy, confused. What, why? There are people in the woods. I don't know who they are, but we need to go. What are you talking about? I didn't have time to explain. I started shoving things into my pack, sleeping bag, clothes, whatever I could grab. Derek finally got up and started helping, though he clearly thought I was overreacting. We broke down the tent in record time, stuffed everything into our packs, and started hiking back toward the trailhead. It was pitch black, and we had only one headlamp between us. The beam bounced wildly as we moved, making the forest look even more disorienting. We'd been hiking for maybe 10 minutes when we heard the voices again, behind us, closer than before. Multiple voices, overlapping, chanting in that language I couldn't understand. Derek heard them too. What the hell is that? I don't know, just keep moving. The voices grew louder, following us. They weren't catching up, but they weren't falling behind either, just maintaining the same distance. We reached the point where we'd left the main trail and turned onto it, moving faster now that the footing was better. The voices continued, echoing through the trees. Then, suddenly, they stopped. We kept moving, not willing to risk slowing down. It took us over an hour to reach the parking lot. When we finally got there and threw our gear into Derek's truck, I looked back at the trailhead. Standing at the edge of the forest, just outside the reach of the parking lot lights, were figures. I counted 4 of them, tall, dark, motionless, watching us. "Drive," I said. Derek saw them too. He started the truck and we left, tires squealing as he pulled out of the lot. Neither of us spoke during the 2-hour drive back to his apartment. When we got there, I grabbed my bag and told him I was going home. He asked if we were breaking up. I said yes. He didn't argue. I never went back to the Cherokee National Forest. Derek texted me a few times after that, wanting to talk about what we'd seen. I ignored the messages. Whatever those things were, people, entities, something else, I didn't want to discuss them, didn't want to think about them. I started hiking again the following spring, but only on well-trafficked trails. And I never camp anymore, not since that night, because I know what I saw, I know those things were real, and I know they were waiting for something. Maybe waiting for us to stay, maybe waiting for us to join them around that fire. I'm grateful we didn't give them the chance. Story 10. I was hired as a caretaker for a remote property in the mountains of North Georgia in the summer of 2022. The job posting had been vague: maintain grounds, perform minor repairs, ensure property security, but the pay was exceptional and it included free housing in a cabin on the land. I'd been living in my car after losing my last job, so the offer felt like a lifeline. The owner was an LLC, and all my communication went through a property manager named Angela, who I never met in person. Everything was handled via email. The property was about 300 acres, mostly forested, with a main house and the smaller caretaker cabin where I'd be living. Angela sent me detailed instructions. Check the main house weekly to ensure no break-ins or damage, keep the access road clear, maintain the grounds within 100 yards of both buildings, report any issues immediately. Simple enough. She emphasized that the main house was off-limits otherwise. I was to check it, but not enter unless absolutely necessary. The owners valued their privacy. I moved into the caretaker cabin in early June. It was nicer than I expected: 1 bedroom, full kitchen, wood stove, even satellite internet. Solar panels on the roof provided power. The main house was about a quarter-mile away through the woods, connected by a gravel path. It was a massive place, 3 stories, all stone and dark wood. Very gothic. The windows were shuttered, and the whole thing had a closed-up, lifeless feel. I did my first inspection that week and found everything secure. The inside was dark and stuffy, furniture covered in sheets. I didn't linger. The first few weeks were quiet. I spent my days clearing brush, fixing fence posts, walking the property perimeter. The isolation suited me. I'd been around people too much in the city, and this felt like a reset. Only thing that bothered me was how quiet it got at night. No insects, no animals, just wind and the occasional creak of trees. I mentioned it to Angela in an email. She replied that the property was at high elevation and wildlife was sparse. Made sense. In July, things started to change. I'd wake up in the morning and find small items moved around in the cabin. A coffee mug I'd left on the counter would be on the table. A book I'd been reading would be open to a different page. Little things. I assumed I was just being forgetful, my brain adjusting to the solitude. But then I started finding footprints. They'd appear overnight in the soft dirt around the cabin. Barefoot prints, human-sized but oddly proportioned. The toes were too long, and there'd be a deep impression in the heel like whoever made them was carrying a lot of weight. The prints would circle the cabin, then lead off into the woods. I followed them once. They went about 100 yards toward the main house, then just stopped. No tracks leading away, no sign of where the person had gone, just ended mid-stride. I reported it to Angela. She replied that the property sometimes attracted trespassers and that I should call the local sheriff if I felt unsafe. I called. A deputy came out, looked around, said he'd increased patrols in the area. The footprints stopped appearing after that, for a while. In August, I was doing my weekly check of the main house. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer and immediately knew something was wrong. The air smelled different, not stale anymore, fresher, like someone had been airing the place out. I walked through the first floor checking rooms. Everything seemed normal until I reached the study. The sheets had been removed from the furniture. A desk was uncovered, and on it were papers, handwritten notes. I walked over and looked at them. They were lists. Names, dates, locations. Most of the names I didn't recognize, but a few looked familiar. People who'd gone missing in the area over the years. I'd seen stories about them on local news sites. Hikers who'd vanished. Campers who'd never come back. Next to each name was a date and a single word: claimed, taken, accepted. My hands were shaking as I picked up one of the pages. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, walking across the second floor directly above me. I froze. Angela had said the owners were never here, but the property was unoccupied except for me. I put the paper down carefully and backed toward the door. The footsteps stopped. Then they started again, moving toward the staircase. Descending, I left. I walked out the front door, didn't run but moved fast, and went straight back to my cabin. I locked the door and sat there for an hour trying to decide what to do. I emailed Angela, told her someone was in the main house. She replied within 10 minutes. Owners arrived unexpectedly for brief stay. You were not informed. Apologies for confusion. Please do not enter main house until further notice. I wanted to believe that, but the footsteps had been wrong, too heavy, too slow. And those papers, why would property owners keep lists of missing people? I told myself to let it go. I needed this job. I needed the money and the housing. I'd ignore the weirdness and just do my work. But the footprints came back, every night. Always around the cabin, always leading toward the main house. And now there were other signs. Scratches on the cabin door. Deep gouges, like something had been trying to get in. Items inside the cabin would be moved more drastically. My bed shifted a foot from the wall. All the kitchen cabinets standing open when I woke up. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. In early September, I woke up in the middle of the night to someone knocking on the cabin door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I lay there not moving, barely breathing. The knock came again, then a voice, my mother's voice. "Ethan, are you in there? I need your help." My mother lived in Florida. I talked to her 2 days ago on the phone. She was not at my cabin door in the mountains of Georgia. I didn't answer. The voice called out again. "Ethan, please, I'm hurt, let me in." I got out of bed, grabbed the knife and crept to the door. I looked through the peephole. Standing on the porch was a figure. Tall, pale, dressed in ragged clothing. Its face was wrong, too smooth like a mannequin. The mouth moved when it spoke, but the movements didn't match the sounds. "Ethan, open the door." I backed away. The knocking continued, harder now. The door rattled in its frame. I grabbed my phone and called the sheriff. The dispatcher said a deputy would be there in 30 minutes. I stayed on the line with her, describing what was happening. The knocking finally stopped around the time I saw headlights coming up the access road. The deputy found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone on the property. He checked the main house, locked and secure. He suggested I might be experiencing stress from the isolation. Offered to give me a ride into town if I wanted to take a break. I declined. After he left, I packed a bag. I didn't have anywhere to go, but I couldn't stay there. As I was carrying my bag to my car, I saw something at the edge of the woods. Multiple figures, standing in a line watching me. Tall, pale, motionless. I counted 7 of them. I got in my car and drove. I didn't go back for my other belongings. I emailed Angela that evening and quit. She replied that I forfeited my final paycheck by abandoning the position. I didn't care. I stayed with a friend in Chattanooga for a few weeks while I found a new job. About a month after I left, I got curious and looked up the property. I found a news article from 10 years ago about a woman who'd gone missing while hiking near that area. Her name was on one of the lists I'd seen in the main house. Next to her name had been the word accepted. I don't know what that means. I don't know what those things in the woods were, or what they wanted, or what the owners of that property had to do with them. I just know I got out, and that some places, some jobs, aren't worth any amount of money. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.